I'll start with you. Why this collection and why now?
Well, the most obvious answer would be it's 50 years, so it's nice to hang the project on that peg. But the truth is that when one looks at the facts of Columbus 68 and looks at the characters and the dynamics and the interactions between the different constituencies, it's hard not to notice that every one of these beats has, as it were, a contemporary analog. Many of the key issues of the time are very relevant to today.
Professor, let me bring you into this, all right? Because you become part of this. Was this something that was planned, or did it kind of evolve organically?
The actual protest itself was spontaneous, but there were a whole lot of social forces that were coming together at the end of the 60s, which created a critical mass both of white students and black students who were prepared to take action on behalf of social change. So beyond the spontaneity, the capability for seizing the attention of the country was there, and that's why we were so successful, not only in taking over the buildings, but in ultimately achieving the demands that we placed upon the institution.
Last question for you. A message in terms of today, looking back 50 years. What might have...
I speak in part, as it were, for Mark Rudd, who is a very thoughtful guy, and his message is about organizing. Columbia 68, I mean, you ask, what's so interesting about Columbia 68 is that it is spontaneous, but that spontaneity is rooted in years of organizing on the campus, whether it be amongst the white students or among the black students. There's this interesting interplay between careful organization and spontaneity. Yeah. And I think, so organization is a key message of this whole
it's a marvelous book you put together. Professor Sales, good to talk with you. And share some of these recollections as we as old guys have. Thanks for both joining us. You both be well.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Welcome once again to the Radical Imagination. I'm your host, Jim Vrettos. Left-wing politics and the dream and vision of a forceful and militant left in the United States dates back to the French Revolution. One explanation for its relative weakness in the country, in the political process of America, has been the failures of socialist organizations and leadership. Parochial factions and individuals who believed they were the purest version of leftist truth came to dominate its message at times. Dogmatically and sometimes ruthlessly, these groups promoted their ideas in ways that created a divisiveness among progressives that crippled any chance of left unity. The takeover in recent years of Left Forum is an example of this sort of leftist mindset in action. Founded in the 1960s by such independent thinking scholars as Stanley Aronowitz, Manning Marable, Francis Fox Piven, and Cornel West, and attracting thousands of participants, Left Forum gradually became the largest annual conference and gathering of radical and progressive thinking in North America. True to the worst of left history, the chief coordinator of the forum was threatened and removed from the position of 9 years during which he had overseen the greatest growth and popularity the forum had ever known. The board members conducting the coup subsequently failed miserably in their bullying attempts to control the now defunct conference. But the left, like the proverbial phoenix, has risen again. A conference at Long Island University, Brooklyn, following in the tradition of Left Forum and socialist scholars, will be held under the general thematic banner of No War but Class War. It will feature over 75 panels and 3 plenaries over a period of 3 days beginning May 31st and ending June 2nd. Topics will range from Palestinian liberation to radical pedagogy, from electronic warfare to anti-imperialism and resistance, from abolition and racial capitalism to racial ecology and eco-socialism. We're honored to have on the Radical Imagination today Kristin Lawler and Michael Pelias, two of the leading organizers and sponsors of the conference, and two of the brightest radical scholar activists in the movement. Kristin is a professor of sociology at the University of Mount St. Vincent and has written extensively on cultural politics and cultural social theory. Michael is a professor in the humanities department at LIU, where he has taught and written extensively on ancient and modern philosophy and political theory. The ethos of the conference is a strictly egalitarian one. Everyone is invited to contribute in a camaraderie spirit and is open to all currents of critical Marxist theory. Sounds like a very good way to rebuild a vibrant left conference and movement. So thank you so very, very much, Kristin. And Michael, you're up there in Montreal. Thank you for being there with us on this wonderful occasion where we can talk about this new conference. And to get us going, let me, I brought my edition of course, the Bible here, Stanley Aronowitz, The Crisis in Historical Imperialism. Materialism.
Materialism.
Yes, I said we'll get to imperialism. I got too excited here. Class, politics, and culture in Marxist theory. And of course, we all miss Stanley. He was on the original Radical Imagination, but he's still with us, and he's with us in this conference as well. So Michael, let me just begin here on the brief little blurb in the back, and maybe you can get us started in understanding what this conference is about and why this is such an important contribution for left thinking at this point. Stanley Aronowitz uncovers the fundamental problems in Marxist theory with respect to nature, gender, and race relations, the concept of class in historical time, and argues that the traditional Marxist paradigm cannot comprehend the originality of new social movements, except strategically. And here's a very important point. He contends that the centrality of cultural categories, as raised by the feminist, ecology, and racial freedom movements, among others, provides the crucial difference for the late industrial world, demanding a break from the dominant tendencies within Marxism to reduce causality to its economic features. So, help us bring that down to earth, Michael, if you get this answers first, and tell us what participants in the conference are attempting to do and people who want to join in the conference. What should they expect?
Okay, thank you so much, Jim, and for having both me and Kristin on, and it's a real pleasure to be on the show again. Going back to what you mentioned, yes, of course, Kristin and I are both highly influenced and shaped in many ways, and long conversations with Stanley, in my case, well over 30 odd years, and Kristin as one of his best students and someone who took up his charge to begin cultural studies. And as we know, Stanley's work was central to the beginning of cultural studies in the United States, starting with a kind of reinterpretation and if you will, a kind of North Americanization of the Birmingham School in England, founded by Stuart Hall, as well as a mix of many other tendencies. So I mean, I'm certainly pleased to be here, and I know Kristin is too, and she'll add a lot to the conversation, of course. What you mentioned about bringing Stanley down to earth, I think there's always this misconception among the left that somehow theory is out in outer space or way above everybody. I mean, the beauty of Aronowitz's work, and I think, and this translates into the conference that we're doing, beginning May 31st, is that it really is one of the great movements of what Marx would say was the movement from the abstract to the concrete. What we see is not really what we get all the time. And Stanley had this amazing capacity, and I think this was transferred to a lot of the sessions of the Left Forum and the panels that were formed and the plenaries, of moving from the abstract to the concrete to make theory much more viable in the world. And to understand, I have a kind of slogan that's based on Kant. Theory without practice is blind, but practice without theory even makes you blinder. So if that's a kind of paradox, we're always working the tightrope with. So when you mention his book, which I consider, in discussion with him and I think a group of us in the Institute for the Radical Imagination would argue this was one of his fundamental theoretical books, after the great False Promises, that was published in 1973. And The Crisis tried to address a tendency on the left, which was a very major tendency, to only think in terms of the haves and the have-nots, standard orthodox Marxism, as well as what we ultimately would call the ideology of economic determinism. And in this case, Stanley really took it upon himself to rework the notion of class, which really was much more based on movement and a kind of a sense of including many more groups in movement, in formation. And this would include the feminist movement, the Black freedom movement, the disability movement, ironically, and of course, the labor movement, which he was very, very close to. So, going back, a little bit full circle, I think he really gave us something much more imaginative, speaking of the radical imagination, imaginative and things that were always contemporary. And as I've written about Stanley, Stanley always remained contemporary. He always would change with the conjuncture. He was protean in that ability, while retaining a great class position throughout. And he understood that the struggle is also in theory among classes. So returning to, this new attempt to rebuild, if you will, the left in person in terms of an annual conference. I think the beauty of the Left Forum, and before that the Socialist Scholars Conference, it was not an exclusionary conference. There were many people that would bring papers on activism, current social movements, and at the same time there were theorists present, both in the plenaries and in sessions over the years. And we're trying in a way to not only reconstruct that, but even make it more contemporary to build towards the future, learning from a lot of the mistakes of the past, that the left is always in the know, or that the left is great because it has the right critique, et cetera. Yeah. We're trying to open this up into terms of rethinking, the text of Marx, rethinking the movements on the ground, and maybe to play, in a way, a very different role going into the future, where we learn somewhat from, and I hate to say this, but really from the neoconservative right in terms of, entering into dialogues in churches, schools, school boards, etc., and to really have much more of a presence. So this conference that's coming up, which again, as you mentioned, will feature over 75 panels, is an attempt to bring people together to start talking about these things once again in person, to be able to engage with, the many booksellers will be there, for people that haven't seen each other in person for a long time. So in some ways, I consider this a happening, if you will, in the old sense of the happening. It's an event, that we really are, trying to get out there and make much of, So right. I'll stop there. When you space critical theory, we can go back to that. But, Stanley's intervention in The Crisis in Historical Materialism got him into a lot of trouble, to put it mildly. You know, he's not a Marxist, one faction of the left. What's he doing? He's betraying us, etc. But I think it was a real attempt and a major attempt, and especially in the first 2 chapters of the book, especially the necessity of philosophy, an attempt to reground, rethink, if you will, Marx's text in the light of the 1980s, and which I still think is very relevant today.
And the new movements of the 60s to be more inclusionary.
Yes.
Yeah,
right.
You would agree with that?
I would, definitely. I think that there's something, especially in that text, I mean, what really sort of was a life-changing insight for me was thinking through, I mean, first of all, what he was doing, thinking through sort of new theoretical developments, thinking through post-structuralism, like you said, the new social movements, from a Marxist perspective. You know, he really had that kind of, you know, out of the old left and also part of the new left. Generationally, he was very singular.
C. Wright Mills, the sociological imagination.
Yeah, I think there were things that he could
type.
see that were different from what other people were seeing. He also, I mean, part of his example is just to never sort of stop thinking. You know, not be kind of like defensive, oh, this is something different from the theory that I do, or I'm steeped in, or whatever, but to really think through new ideas and generate new concepts. I think also the most important thing to me about that text is sort of the working class subjectivity that busts through and in many ways drives the sort of accumulation process and all of the more economistic stuff about Marxism. That sort of insight about, especially, I mean, it was in False Promises too, but you know, the sort of counter logic of the working class as opposed to the logic of capital, and the counter logic being about pleasure, play, enjoyment, life, qualitatively valuable things, community, politics, as opposed to this, you know, endless quantification for this occult, you know, quantification of
because that's what Stanley was. He
capital.
was this working class kid from the Bronx. And that was steeped in that. I'm just curious about your own background. Did you, when you first met Stanley, were you more rooted in a more traditional Marxist orientation?
No. As a matter of fact, not at all.
Not at all. So
no,
you got a little of that from him.
I was sort of out of Catholic university. I'd spent you know, a lot of time studying philosophy and sociology, and I was kind of a lib actually when I met Stanley. But I did, you know, I had a job from 13 to 18. That was a union job. You know, my first job was for the United Food and Commercial Workers, and so it was very clear to me that, you know, every now and then I'd go in and punch in, and there'd be a raise. That there were union meetings. That there were, you know, it was a different kind of high school job than any of my other friends had, and it was because I had union members in my family that had helped me get the job and stuff. So.
I think I should just start thinking about the nature of work, as Stanley also said.
Absolutely.
Where we spend more time than anything, right? And the work, and what the hell are we doing there? And punching the clock.
And I think that's something that he never stopped insisting on, and that's, you know, sort of fundamental to working class subjectivity, right? Without which there's nothing, right? Without which there's no politics.
That's the foundation.
And that subjectivity is steeped in you know, in this, what he calls this sort of counter logic that's really about vitality and libidinal connection and politics and more communal ways of doing things and so to me that's incredibly important and it speaks to how this conference is in some ways in the tradition of what he was doing and what he was talking about. I mean, very much in that tradition. We're sort of carrying it on. And the idea of getting people together, especially when we're at this really powerful movement or moment in a massive protest movement all over that is not letting up. This is a moment, I think, for thinking together. And I think it's incredibly important for people to get together, talk about where we've been, what's happening, strategize, even in kind of informal places. One of the things I'm most excited about this conference is that it's at LIU, which is so cool. You can get there, by every subway, and Junior's is right across the street.
Right off the bridge, right.
Heart of Brooklyn.
The cheesecake. And, you're right
people
there.
from Manhattan, you can walk over the bridge.
There you
fantastic.
go, right.
But there's also these great, there's going to be tons of booksellers, and there's this beautiful courtyard outside where, to me, that's in some ways where some of the most important things happen at a conference like this. I think the space is very important, and there's going to be really a space for people to just hang out and shoot the shit and talk about, I saw your panel, and I saw your panel, and have these kinds of sort of cross-pollinating conversations that
have it happening.
Yeah.
As Michael is saying.
Exactly.
And so Michael, Kristin talked about libidinal influences here. Now, and the writing, we're just, what about you?
I'm getting old.
No, you're not getting old. Come on, you're
I mean
Greek.
It broadly speaking.
You're Greek, so you that never dies.
Yes,
so
yes. I still have a lot of cathexis left, if you will.
Oh, good. And that.
But anyway.
Yeah. Go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, she raises a good point. I'd just like to say, since Kristin is one of the organizers and also presenter and chair of many panels, that Kristin will be doing a lot of work on labor. She does a lot of work on labor studies, and she'll be doing a panel on labor in Palestine. And speaking of Stanley, we are presenting a book that will be at the conference, The Aronowitz Reader, that Kristin helped edit and choose many of the essays that are contained within.
Terrific.
And
Wow.
we will be presenting on that book for 2 hours on Saturday afternoon. So for those people in the audience interested in following up a little more, if you will, theoretically and hopefully playfully on the conversation of Aronowitz's position in the left and where we go from here and what we can learn and take forward, please join us for that, as well as Kristin's panels on labor from Palestine. And just to say one other thing too, Kristin mentioned subjectivity, and of course working class subjectivity, which is crucial going forward, that this has been forgotten, where people just identify, I'm a worker, I'm a wage slave, etc., and very little attention is paid to everyday life and to this subjectivity that really needs to be, articulated, shaped, and worked with constantly going forward. And something that, again, the left has, in some ways left behind in some ways with a lot of cliches and jargon. And I think Kristin's work, her own work, her personal, writing is addressing a lot of those problems, as well as, the panels she'll be on will engage this.
Yeah.
And so I also want to speak to something that Stanley and I discussed much, and another colleague of ours from the Institute of Radical Imagination and another friend of ours. They have produced a book on communist ontologies, which is really about the ontology, the being, if you will, of what it means to have a communist subjectivity today. And there's also going to be a panel on that. So it's not just going to be, the latest rates of exploitation or concepts, new articulations of alienation, even though these are crucial concepts going forward. There's going to be a much more of an open-endedness at this conference in terms of its panels. And I think this, again, follows in the tradition, if you will, of a happening of an engagement that that would make Aronowitz and his good friend, who unfortunately can't be there, Cornel West, proud. That we're going to be all over. There are going to be panels on music as well for Cornel.
Well, Cornel is giving a speech right now, actually, in Scotland on John Coltrane. So, but I don't want to let this go. communist mentality.
Ontology,
Ontology.
not
Explain what that means
Yeah.
in 30 seconds to get us.
Well, what would be the being
Understanding
of
a
the
little
future
better.
human? What would be the being of the future human? How do we
Social
create
animal.
new praxis of leading towards the creation, again, of the human being that can be, totally vital and engaged in life, right? Not fragmented, not just a specialist in one field,
Exactly.
etc. How do we begin to?
But not wedded to the
articulate
party
how do we
either, right,
transmit that?
Michael?
I'm sorry, Jim.
I'm sorry, not wedded to one particular party.
No, not at all.
Either,
No,
okay,
this has
right.
nothing to do
Not
with
yet.
Not
party
yet.
formation. Yeah,
Not yet, okay.
Not yet.
not yet. And Kristin's got a good idea here. The party right now is the educational party. We have not yet gotten to the political party stage, right? And unfortunately, yeah.
Well, do you consider Cornell West's efforts, would that fit in very nicely to some of what you're talking about here?
Absolutely.
At
And
the
the
Justice and Love Party, as he calls it?
yes, and Cornell wrote the foreword to the Aronowitz Reader that
Yes,
we're
he
going to
did.
be.
It's right here, too. Yeah.
That we're going to be
They're very close.
having a panel on. We'll be selling some of them too. So we're really proud of the sort of compilation that we've put together, and his opener is just absolutely wonderful. So yeah, of course,
Yeah, no,
absolutely.
So your influence in writing has been on cultural studies.
Yes.
And so I just want to also ask you, you mentioned the panel, if you can, briefly, what do you hope to cover in that panel on the labor movement?
Oh,
for
okay.
example?
Well, there are I'm doing two labor movement panels. One is Labor for Palestine, and it's basically a number of leaders of rank and file groups inside major unions in the U.S. who are pushing their unions to honor a call that the Palestinian General Federation of Trade Unions put out in October. It's a good old-fashioned technique. I used to study this with the Irish during World War I, who were not interested in having anything to do with weapons flowing towards the British Empire, because they were Irish, obviously. This idea that direct action at this point to, if we're talking about weapons that are manufactured in the United States, in factories in the United States, in unionized factories in the United States, many of them, not all, that gives workers a certain amount of power to refuse and to, do all kinds of other things, like call on their unions to take even more, like within the UAW, Sean Fain, I like to call Sinn Fein, originally sort of took it's very inspiring what he's doing, all of the sort of organizing, the Great Victory, and, calling for a ceasefire is very important. But, inside these unions, these things don't come from nowhere. He's a good guy, but there's rank and file agitation for direct action to stop the flow of weapons to this genocide. And that, I think, is...
How about other parts of the world? Is that included in that struggle?
Well, I think that there's something that's happening in sort of the Palestinian solidarity movement now, and what's called the student intifada, where it is about sort of through Palestine, through the universal kind of through this very singular particular, people talking about having more control over the social product, where it goes. Does it go to fossil fuel infrastructure? Does it go to gentrifying, displacing real estate development by giant non-profit organizations that pay no taxes to the city of New York and yet are somehow able to call in the cops on their own students? So it's all sort of a piece, I think, and I actually think in a lot of these student encampments, the discussions are in that direction, which is why we're highlighting a lot of that.
So it's not just Palestine.
It's sort of all connected.
Yeah.
It's all connected.
But
certainly Palestine is singular in many ways. But I think also because this is something, there have been, of course, horrifying things that happen all over the world and that have happened. This is something that seems like the entire industrialized world is sort of behind it, which makes it even more horrifying, I think, and also even more of a universal struggle.
So the work of Seymour Melman, for example, conversion of the military machine into the sort of economic necessities of peace is something that he was also talking about. Melman was talking about at Columbia. This entailed not just one particular area, but a worldwide effort. And so I know Michael is familiar with that too.
Absolutely. I mean, the U.S. is the biggest weapons broker all over the world. It's disgusting. And there's something incredible there's something very nice about young people. They are not inured to the insanity of all of this. They just, they stay with that. And right now I just feel like what they're doing is extraordinary.
I think one of the panels is Palestinian liberation, correct? What does that mean?
Well,
what would you point to as an example of what that means? What?
Well, I mean, the first thing
happen?
would be a permanent ceasefire. I mean, for this horror that we're watching unfold before our eyes to stop, that would be the first thing. And then it's almost like people have forgotten about, I don't know, diplomacy, great power rivalries, and national liberation groups playing off one great power against another, I think is sort of an interesting possibility.
Including Hamas? Or would you include them in that struggle as well?
In the Palestinian liberation struggle? Of course.
You would include that?
Well, I mean, yeah. I mean, that's just an empirical fact at
Okay,
this point.
let me just briefly, give me 3 or 4 minutes on this. I was just pulled up, since of course we're all familiar with the student uprising again in Columbia. And, this was a very recent article by Mark Rudd interviewing in Haaretz magazine, the Israeli left journal. Briefly, bear with me. All right, so it's entitled, Mark Rudd led anti-war students at Columbia in 1968. He says Gaza protesters are repeating his mistakes. So he goes on to say, Rudd notes in several incidents, students crossed the line. This is what in his day there. Not only did they regularly denounce the police as pigs, as some do now, but in a famous incident, a student jumping out of one of the occupied buildings on campus landed on a policeman's back, paralyzing him for life. Malcolm X, a civil rights and black empowerment leader known for demanding freedom and equality by any means necessary, a slogan that has come to dominate the current anti-Israel protests as well, was, according to Rudd, like a god for student protesters at Columbia in the 60s. Quote unquote. I fell for all that stuff. I fell for black power. I fell for any means necessary. I wanted to express my moral outrage. That he grants as young people. They have that, and there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. Thank God they do. But he goes on to say, I wanted to express my moral outrage. I went overboard. Eventually, I went way overboard with the whole Weatherman craziness. Watching the latest student protesters from afar, Rudd fears that they are repeating his mistakes. They don't like to hear this. Young people don't like criticism. Have you ever noticed that? But the truth is that I suffer from a sort of PTSD because many of the things I believed and the actions I took were wrong and had horrible outcomes. I lay awake at night thinking about the big errors I made. Okay, making the same errors now by not making clear that they are for peace and for the humanity of all people. We blurred the line between violence and nonviolence back then, and so are they right now. And I'm not going to defend them because they're playing into the hands of the right wing of the country. And what terrifies me is that they could end up bringing Trump back into power. Just a couple more. Not by any stretch of the imagination does Rudd justify Israel's war in Gaza, which he insists on calling a mass murder. I don't like the term genocide. Nor does he condone the Israeli occupation, which he says was a punch in the gut that decades ago turned him into a vocal advocate for the Palestinian cause. But he is deeply troubled. The student protesters at Columbia today seem to have no compassion in their hearts for the other side and would even justify violence against Israelis as a necessary means. Last paragraph. I think the only way possible for 7 million Jews in Israel to live with 7 million Palestinians is if they're not scared, if they understand that their humanity will be respected. But while the students understand that nonviolence is a useful tactic, they don't really believe in nonviolence. The reason for that, he says, is their fundamental belief in the right of the oppressed to resist even if the outcomes are bloody. They're not supporters of Hamas, they're supporters of their own stupid ideas. They believe that Hamas is the oppressed, that the oppressed have the right to resist, and that those who are safe, for the most part, white kids like themselves, have no right to tell the oppressed what to do. Trust me, I lived this, and friends of mine died because of the stupidity. They're painting themselves into a corner, just like I did.
Okay, Jim, if I could reply to
Absolutely.
what you read from Mark, if you will. First of all, and going back to Stanley in his introduction to Critical Theory, the book that collected essays by Max Horkheimer, what is critical versus traditional theory, points out the left's big mistake and SDS's faction of the weatherman as not being, good. This was as early as 1973 that it really hurt the movement, right? Stanley wrote this. So I want to just throw that back in, which led to Stanley's, I think, the crisis in historical materialism, what he saw as, violence for violence sake, and this was the only way. Speaking of violence, in the student movements, at least from what I hear on the ground, and I have pretty vast contacts at multiple universities. I get calls at 3 in the morning from California. I don't know why I take them, but I do on occasion. That most of these movements at this time have been extremely peaceful, and that the violence has come from the police and the police actions, which have been authorized by university presidents at this moment.
Agreed.
And
agreed.
By going,
I'm just saying, at the conference, will there be opposing sides? For example, will you have a secular socialist Zionist on a panel? For example,
don't believe we do, but actually at one of the plenaries, Udi Aloni, who's a great filmmaker, he's an Israeli filmmaker, he'll be speaking. He's not a Zionist. I think
whose mother, by the way, Jim, was Shulamith, Aloni, who was a member of Rabin's cabinet, as well as a member of the Knesset.
No, I'm just trying to get
a little bit of the background there.
Yeah.
So we're not talking about people who just left, on their.
No, I get all that. I'm agreeing with you. Mark would agree with what you just said. I just see a certain rigidity in these protests. And when you say ceasefire forever, what about the other side? What concretely, what is the praxis that's going to bring about more of a peace movement within the Arab world? Hamas is not a bunch of Mother Teresas. Sorry.
Even Mother Teresa wasn't really
let's not bring Mother Teresa's had her own issues. But I'm serious.
They started as Mother Teresa.
They also,
We're social service.
But they've been killing their own people. They have created the tunnels for themselves, not for the civilians. And they knew very well that so many were going to be killed. That in no way is condoning what's going on with the Israeli government. I would just like to see a little bit of balance here, and I hope that your conference will be able to offer that. I think it's desperately needed.
I think there will be many people there with many different ideas. I think one of the, but no, it's not like, I don't know, CNN, like some people say this, some people say that.
No,
like
I'm not
it's
talking
not
about that.
We actually,
But let's be
we're the left, you know? I mean,
Yeah, well, there's divisions within the left.
Okay, yeah. I mean,
So is it one uniform
I'd
vision
say
on that?
less and less at this point. I
Less
think
and less what?
division within the left over this position. Although one of our plenaries is there a left in the United States? And if so, you know, what does it look like? So this is actually a very important conversation and one that we've really
And how do you heal?
highlighted.
Do you touch on how do you heal traumatized people around the world? Is that part of on the agenda? Both sides here have been highly traumatized. They're acting out of extreme fear on both sides. That's what seems to me needs to be looked at to at least a certain extent. Does the left, is it capable of doing that?
Well, that's a big question. I mean, you know, again, I'm very much about, you know, communities of care and building building those kind of revolutionary communities where care is central, and the care of the self and the care of subjectivity. And of course, at this point, obviously, you have 1.5 million, maybe rising, displaced people that need care for.
Yeah.
And it's not only happening, I know that it's, you know, the Azure, you know, this movement that is going on at the universities, and it's centered around Palestine. But people should remember there are 2 million people that were killed in the Congo over the minerals that may help us do these Zoom sessions, et cetera, right? The warfare that goes on and produced by, you know, capital and capital's relations. And, you know, we hear remarks by Jared Kushner, what beautiful beachfront property certain parts of Gaza Strip will look like. We're hearing comments like this. So in another sense, I think that the conference itself, no war should be emphasized, but class war. And what does class mean in this context, and what is happening? So I think this is very important to keep in mind. It's not only about the Palestinian question. You know, it's global. We have many panels. We have we have a panel on Africa. We have a panel on the global South. We have several panels about struggles and elsewhere in the world. And I understand all the things that are going on around this current conflict. And I'm one that, you know, grew up sort of somewhat, you know, by reading Herzl and Buber, et cetera, and understanding the project of 1948 in a certain way. But I personally I think this is so far from what they had in mind, you know, in terms of the original intention, you know, that was there, that they would be disgusted and horrified, and maybe like the Gideon Levies of the world that are horrified and disgusted with what's going on in the state of Israel and the policies that are coming down. So I think this is important to remember. I mean, you know, it's not only a simple opposition that's happening here. This is something that's building and building and building. And I don't think, you know, it's so either or in the student's mind. I think there is, at least the people I talk to, enormous respect, you know, in a sense, you know, for you know, thinking and actually open dialogue. But I think that problematically, the universities are cutting that down. We have a panel on the repression in the university, the new McCarthyism. This is another thing that we should really be very well aware of, how people are being censored. Free speech is being censored by university presidents once again. You know, and where does this come from? How to trace it? How to and we owe it to this generation. Remember, this generation versus Mark Rudd's and mine and yours, Jim, is facing many years of austerity and inflation. They did not have, you know, no inflation, and you know, you could still buy a house for $30,000 back when we were doing.
Right, even in Montreal?
And,
No, your points are really well taken. I'm very glad you brought that in, that it is a global vision that you're trying to develop.
Yeah,
there.
I mean, no
And
war
that's
but the
wonderful.
class
No,
war
yeah,
is
no-
about the kind of internationalism.
And no class without war, no war without class.
Yeah, we're moving. I mean, the entire world is sort of seems to be mobilizing towards World War III. Times of world war are very, very important. I don't think we're necessarily ready, but can be incredibly important times for national liberation struggles, for labor struggles, for international solidarity. It hasn't always gone that way, of course, but it doesn't mean that it couldn't. So the kind of internationalism that it would take to dismantle the very borders and everything that sort of came out of that, especially that came from the British Empire, is precisely what we're looking at. You know, people talking with one another about political action beyond those borders, beyond those
Thinking more, again, globally and how we're all
Yeah,
in this
yeah.
mess together.
Yeah, and that we
And,
can't get, you know, and I don't necessarily think that people are at this point, but to sort of get all caught up in these discussions about war where it's like you have to take one side or another when it comes to great power rivalries or when it comes to, just sort of this impending, seems to me,
Even though that's what we're
massive
socialized
war.
to do.
Yeah, of
The-
course, of
the
course.
false patriotism
yeah,
and
yeah,
so on.
absolutely. But that's precisely what we need to be able to
Yeah.
get past and organize beyond. It's the great tradition of the labor movement, of communism. It's about internationalism. You know, capitalist wars are not our issue. You know, they are potentially an opportunity. And that's
To
it.
uncover the greed and exploitation and the brutality
And the insanity.
of the insanity of it
fucking
all.
insanity of it all.
And
Jim,
Yeah, go ahead.
if I could add,
Sure, Michael.
you know, the thing that's impressed me the most about this generation and the people out there, they're not really power hungry. They're not really about power in the sense of constituted power. They're totally against constituted power. And working with these younger people, we've had several people in their 20s and their early middle 30s helping us organize this conference. They really work hard.
Yeah.
They're not about coming in with preconceived notions, etc. They just see the world for what it is right now. And obviously they're frightened and at the same time want to understand and want to develop, you know, something that makes it the planet being habitable for them for the next 50, 60 years and for future generations. So this is very important to keep in mind. We're not dealing with a group of people who are ready to, are power hungry or get caught up in the power mechanisms. I think they're fighting that. I think they understand this. Again, the no war moment. They are against the warfare state. And, you know, in a way, they're against weapon creation. You know, Biden's thing, this is about weapon creation to me. You know, if you really look at what's happening here, this is about the arms industry. This is about weapon creation that's going on. And unfortunately, there's so many human lives on both sides that have been destroyed. But particularly, you know, the ratio to the Palestinians that are going on right now is absolutely horrifying and terrifying. So anyway, I think we need to keep that in mind, and that there is a generation, the future of the left, if you will, that does not bring to the table we just want power, right? In a sense, they want both understanding and they do want peace. They understand that the means are there for peace. You know, that the technology could be used differently. All of this is right. Going back to your friend Seymour Melman, who I have great admiration for, and I recommend to the audience the book After Capitalism. It's a wonderful work, and he's a very utopian thinker, you know, in a good way, critical utopian thinker.
Absolutely. Yeah. Very well put.
So I just wanted to say that. Yeah.
No, very well put. Right. So I look forward to your conference. You want to add? We still have time.
Just as you know, what Michael was saying is that we do have an incredible amount of great panels. We have stuff on, Alex Vitale, David Brotherton will be there with talking about police abolition. Michael Menser and others.
Alex has been on the show a number of times.
Nice,
yeah. He's great.
Folks talking about sort of public power, taking over of municipal power grids, stuff like that. There is political economy stuff. There's all kinds of really great stuff. Another panel I'm doing is labor history. Mike Goldfield will be there. Steve Thornton, who's a great labor historian, and Justine Medina, who's one of the folks who organized at the Amazon warehouse in Staten Island, and who's a young communist organizer. So yeah, there's so much.
Adolph Reed is.
Yes, Adolph Reed will be there with Walter Ben Michaels. There's a book talk on their new book, No Politics But Class Politics, which will be fantastic. There's actually a lot of good book talks. I'm trying to think. Andreas Malm will be there talking about the relationship between fossil fuels and the Palestinian struggle. I'm trying to think. I'm probably forgetting some. I brought my computer so I could look at the program.
The book on Tony Negre that's forthcoming.
Yes, of course. That's
one
going
of
to
our
be amazing.
comrades from Italy,
Yes.
and this will be an interesting talk too about Negre's life as autobiography.
Yes.
And,
which is about to be published. The first volume.
Who was a truly exemplary lesson, like Stanley, in the merger of theory and practice. In many ways,
a number of panels on the social media and the new technology, right?
Yes, which is a particular interest of mine.
Is it?
Yeah,
because,
absolutely. I think,
Michael and I are I certainly am still in the Stone Age. I don't know what age you're in, Michael, but yeah, we were just.
I'm in the Stone Age.
No. So run by that. Tell us a little about your thoughts there and what you hope to see. What makes this a left vision? Maybe that would help also. What makes this somewhat different? Your take on this, let's say, on this specific
well, one of my favorite writers on this attention economy stuff and AI, the digital complex, there's so much good stuff and more coming out all the time. And discussions about sort of the total subsumption of everyday life through our interaction with these machines constantly. We're machine tenders at work increasingly, and then we're increasingly machine tenders in our so-called leisure time. But one of my favorite writers on this stuff is Jonathan Crary, who says, he has a great line, there are no revolutionary subjects on social media. It's just, I think that's very, very true. And I think when you think about, you talked about 1968 and sort of, and now it's, or even, things that have happened over the past 10 or 20 years. When things really happen is when people get together in person. It's not an accident that this movement is sort of an encampment movement and people in the streets. Black Lives Matter a couple of years ago, Occupy Wall Street, and the Indignados and the squares. Yes, people need to be in person together. They just do. There's no this sort of like abstract, we're all these kind of digital objects interacting with one another, mediated through this sort of this algorithm. I mean, it's to be someone who's lived through both, right?
Yes.
Which we all have. Everything is worse and nothing is better.
And to go back, and the 2 minutes we have left, because we want to make sure everybody.
And can I say one thing?
You can say more than one. Absolutely.
It is permeated with this aura of inevitability. There's once
no
the
way
internet,
out. No way out.
There's
no exit.
No going back. It's inevitably progress.
Right.
It's just. That's what I think we need to start. Now, not everyone agrees with me. This is something that will be, I think, a real debate, but and remains a real debate. There are other debates in this about whether, the way in which we're producing value, stuff about like
Yeah, yeah,
techno-feudalism, or is it a means of producing surplus value through, like valorization information? It's sort of a more autonomous way of thinking about this stuff. I think there's so much to dig into when you think about this technology stuff. So yeah, I'm thrilled that there's a lot of stuff.
And
on that.
it gets us back to maybe a good way of ending the show here. Basic Marx.
Yeah.
The factory was the place where people could feel, could talk.
Yeah.
What the hell? Charlie Chaplin, Modern Times. I mean,
Right, but it was also
that
the
was a film
site
right.
of, the sort of the struggle against that,
Exactly,
against any kind of
exactly,
human interaction there.
exactly.
And it was precisely the
Yeah.
move of the introduction of technology, the assembly
Right.
line technology, speed up, all kinds
Mario
of tailored
Savio,
stuff.
free speech.
Yeah.
Put your body in.
Yeah,
Stop the
yeah,
machine.
yeah. Absolutely.
We got
Right.
30
Jim,
seconds.
if I could
Give us
just say one
information.
thing, I want to
Please.
encourage everybody that's listening and
Yes.
everybody not listening, if my voice could go that far, my loud voice. But anyway, to come to the conference.
Yes.
It's May 31st through July 2nd. It's a sliding scale registration fee. You go to radicalimagination.institute to register. Very simple to remember, radicalimagination.institute. And you can register there. Like I said, it's $150 for the 3 days for institutionally sponsored people, for fully waged $150 for students and those that are marginally waged or marginalized.
Yeah.
That's a little plug for the conference.
And with that, you get a slice of Junior's cheesecake.
Well, you can. It's
You can.
available.
Listen,
Yes.
I will be there.
Awesome.
This is terrific, and I'm so glad you have resurrected this conference. It's
gonna be
really
great.
needed.
It's going to be great.
Thank you so
Thank
very,
you so
very
much,
much.
Jim. It's been a
Thank you for
pleasure.
your patience on my own little
No, great.
little
It's
diversion
great.
there.
I'm
But
happy to be on your show.
listen, very happy to have
Yeah.
you both. Take care.
Thank you, Jim.
Michael,
Thank you.
We'll see you
Yeah.
soon.
Yeah.
And all of you, thank you so very, very much for being
We'll see you at
with
the
us.
conference.
Yes,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Okay.
We'll see you next week on The Radical Imagination. This is Jim Vrettos. Wishing you the best. See you next week.